Hello and welcome to Sim.bc, where it right now is 5 past 12 in the day. Yeah, it's just one of those days. Now, mates, today we're going to continue our discussion about imagination and the workplace. But we're not going to discuss as much the career and the career path and the development and furthering of your career as we discussed yesterday. Instead, we're going to focus on the imagination of yourself, right? Keeping the child within you, sort of trying to bring that out into the workplace itself in order to increase the performance that you have in everyday, work life, let's just say. Now, there is deemed to be a lot of repetition in this video from yesterday, so if you saw that, then maybe this won't give you as much value as you would hope for, but probably will, because we will be introducing the same concepts, but in a different, situation, in a different perspective. Now, some things that we will be focusing on is the left and the right brain, the idea that you sort of always tend to use the left side of your brain when you're comfortable at work, and how you should integrate the right part of your brain in order to bring some creativity to your everyday workplace. We will also talk about blind thinking, because it's a new term that I've recently discovered and I absolutely adore what it is all about. It's sort of the visualization of, not actually visualizing anything, sort of why it's called blind thinking. But ladies and gentlemen, mates, let's start with the left and the right brain, because when I studied this, so to say, when I've studied this over the years and when I've been reading up on it now quite recently, it turns out, right, I know, it's amazing. It turns out that most people tend to use their left side of the brain when they're working in their everyday life. They tend to be utilizing the right brain exactly when they start, because everything is new, everything's exciting. They want to know how to adapt to the existing patterns, and they might want to try and change something, because they maybe think that, oh, I'm the most brilliant person in the world, I can see a new way of doing things. But usually when you're new at work, that's not the case. What you want to try to do is that you want to put your train of thought onto the tracks that they lay out for you, and you just want to sort of follow on this line that they've laid out for you, and being like, well, this is what you're supposed to do. Now please show us that you can do this before you try to make your own initiatives. Which is, it sort of sorts itself out. It sort of speaks for itself that that's probably what you're supposed to do most of the time. However, most people tend to, when they get into this train of thought, when they go along the tracks, when they do the same thing over and over again each and every day, they tend to just get very comfortable with what they're doing, and then they're utilizing the left side of their brain because they're in this logical state of what they're supposed to do. They follow a pattern, they follow a list, they follow a sequence of some sort of what they are supposed to do in the workplace in order to achieve a satisfying performance, right? And that's all fine, it's all good, it's all dandy. However, what I want to try and focus on today is the idea that you should try to implement your right side of the brain, try to use your imagination in form of coming up with a creative solution for what you're doing in your everyday work life, sort of making a expression of your impression of work. Now, you can do this in a multitude of ways depending on where you're working. You can either be working with a harmony between simultaneous tasks, so to say that instead of watching one task in isolation, you can instead try and watch this task together with this task and try to combine the two, try to see the combination between the two, where they connect, where they disconnect, why do they disconnect, can we make them to connect in some form, way or fashion, can we make these two tasks easier by combining them, or can we make them easier by separating them even more, instead of just be watching the tasks, as I said, in isolation one-on-one and being like, this is what I'm supposed to do, I followed these steps and now I'm going to move on to the next one, because yet again you're sort of losing yourself in the comfortability that you've made up at work. Because what tends to happen is that you're getting satisfying results through following a certain step, right? You're following these steps, you're getting the satisfactory results that you're supposed to get. However, why stop there? And that is why we're today looking at increasing performance with imagination. As I said, imagination is sort of the expression you have of an impression that you made. So let's say yet again that you have two different tasks. Now, in order for you to express your imagination and express higher performance, you need to find a solution to a problem that probably most people didn't even know existed. And this is why it is so vastly important that you get into a comfortable state at work before you start doing this, right? It's for two different reasons. For the first is because, well, you sort of need to know how everything works in order for you to apply a solution to a problem, right? You need to actually know that this is a consistent problem, this is a consistent hiccup, this is something that is consistently happening over a long period of time, and you will probably only identify this gap in the production if you are able to be comfortable with what you're doing, so that you're on a comfortable level is disturbed by this each and every day. Now, this is a matter of, it can take a matter of weeks for some of you, it can take a matter of months, it can take a matter of years or decades. It all depends on you as an individual, but it's important that you're comfortable with your work situation so that you can find a solution that will be backed up by facts, that will be backed up by something that is actually happening in production, in your service, in your script, whatever it might be. Now, the second reason for why you need to be sort of comfortable with your work before you should implement change, or this is probably more of my suggestion than a definitive answer, right, to this, is because if you aren't comfortable with your workplace, if you're not comfortable in what you're doing at the moment, then there is a high chance, I'm saying chance, there is a high risk that if you implement changes, you will only get more stressed out, because you will try to change something that you're not really comfortable with to begin with. Now, it might be important for me to try to explain what I mean with comfortability. Yet again, as I tried to say in the beginning, when you start following a script, you're probably comfortable with what you are supposed to do. You might not be comfortable with how this is executed, but you're comfortable enough that you know what you are supposed to do and what results you're supposed to get. Now, obviously, the reason for imagination and creativity to take place is because you're not 100% comfortable with the execution of what you're supposed to do, but at least you're comfortable with knowing what the end goal is supposed to be. And that is the place, the plan, the situation, the scenario when you can start making changes that won't stress you out, because you know where you're supposed to go. So you know that you're not aiming in the wrong direction, so to say, with your estimations and with your creativity. Also, you know that there is a consistent problem, a consistent hiccup that is happening all the time that you can address. Now, this is why it's important to be comfortable at work. But yet again, just to sort of word of advice, you shouldn't be too comfortable at work. Believe me, now that I've been starting working for a while at a real company, so to say, wow, that sounded weird, but I was a bartender for the last 2-3 summers, so I wouldn't count that as sort of a real company, even though it is a real company, but a real old-fashioned workplace. But now that I'm working at a real old-fashioned factory, so to say, in between my studies, I've seen people who are getting really comfortable in their work, and they're sort of complaining about it as well. They don't want to be that comfortable, but yet you're not doing anything about it either. You see what I'm saying? So it's sort of a trap getting too comfortable in what you're doing. You're getting into a workplace, you're getting into the routines because we like routines, because we're people, we want to be part of the group, we want to know what we're supposed to do. Many people really much like that, but there are some people who want to progress, who want to be doing things more effectively, who might want to progress their career, but by doing so, they first need to take the step to actually perform better than everybody else, so that they can be recognized, so that they will be achieving a higher status in the company. And by doing these things, some people might be saying, or rather not by doing these things, but in order to do these things, you sort of need to break the conventional train of thought at times, because otherwise you will just be stuck in it. And yet again, this is something that I've seen over the course of this summer, a lot of people that I've worked with has been like, I've been there for 6 years, it wasn't the plan to begin with, but now I'm here. I don't know if I'm gonna quit. I might not quit if I'm offered a higher position, but I just don't want to run around and do the exact same things all the time, every single day, because it just doesn't fulfill me. Fair enough, right? I mean, some people really enjoy doing the same thing over and over again. I would argue most people don't. You want some form of change, at least at times, at least every 5 years, every 10 years, whatever it might be. For me, it will probably be like every 3 years, right? But you want to try out something new in order to know what you most likely want to work with, and this will also lead to a higher performance, that you know that, well, now I'm actually working with something that I really like, instead of something that I'm just working with because, well, I need to work with it. So instead of looking at it as, well, I'm doing this for the upcoming 6 years and I'm going to do the same thing, you can watch a occupation as, well, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to apply a creative way of doing this so that I might change the way that my position is working. I might not need to change my position all of a sudden. I might not need to increase or decrease my position, but I can still do the same thing, but in a new way. Try to apply creativity so that you increase performance, and not that you should do change just for change's sake, right? That's not what I'm trying to say. You're not going to go in to your company and be like, you know what, we're producing, let's say, water bottles in a certain way. Well, I want to produce them like this because it will take up more space. And people are going to be like, well, if it's going to take up more space, reduce the amount of bottles that we can make, and increase the material cost, then maybe that is not going to be the best idea. So yet again, you need to be comfortable in order to see that, well, this wasn't a good idea, but this is a good idea. Maybe you're introducing them to do them this way or this way so that you reduce the cost. I don't know, it's up to you, right? But try to come up with a creative way of changing what you're doing in your everyday life so that you don't get stuck in this situation, right? So that you don't not get stuck in the situation where you've been like, yeah, I've been here for 6 years, it wasn't initially the plan, but now I'm here, I don't know how to get out of this. Now, one way of doing it is that you just quit your job and start to go for a new one. But for everybody, that ain't a choice, right? For some of you, there might not be an option to quit your work. That is why I'm saying, try to find a new way of doing the same thing that you're doing right now, because if you find a new way that you feel is more fulfilling, that you're more comfortable in the execution of what you're supposed to do, then that might lead to higher performance just by the virtue of that you're more happy with what you're doing, so you're more comfortable in what you're doing. Yeah? Fine, good. Let's move on to the second point, and that is blind thinking. Now, this is something that you should try to avoid, and this is a reason for why many people get into this mentality of, well, I've been at the same workplace for 6, 10, 15, 25 years and I don't like it, but I'm still here. Now, yet again, you could be at the same workplace for a very long time and like it. All the better to you, right? 2 thumbs fresh. But for those of you who are at the same workplace but you don't like it, you're probably applying blind thinking. And blind thinking, as I said before, is sort of the rival, it's sort of the natural opposite to imagination and creativity, in the sense that blind thinking is based on the aspect that you're trying to visualize what you're supposed to do. Or rather, you're blinding yourself. You don't visualize what the solutions should be, right? So one can say that open-minded thinking, imagination, visualized thinking, however you want to frame it, right, is the way you want to go about things. You want to visualize the change. You want to see, oh, this doesn't really work. For instance, if we produce a bottle like this, maybe it gets stuck in the production somehow, like this, and then you perhaps don't want to be like, oh, I don't know how to change this, I don't know how to fix this. Now you want to think in a way that you can visualize this to change, so that you can actually see that, oh, it actually worked like that. And that's obviously a very, very simplified way of explaining it, but blind thinking is basically the idea that instead of thinking of a creative way of going about your problem, instead of thinking about different perspectives of how you can attack the same problem, how you can execute the same thing, how you can change the execution rather, you don't think about all of those things, and you instead actively try to block out any form of change from your mind, from your workplace, from your life. So you try to go on the rails And when someone say, because you've been working there for 20 years and people say, maybe we want to change something, do you have any suggestions? And since you've been working here for 20 years, we probably estimate that you will have some observation in the company that perhaps the newer bosses who have worked here for a lower amount of time than you, for a less amount of time than you, maybe don't have the insight that you've had over the last 20 years. And for some of you who are open-minded but just like to work at the same position that you are and are very creative, you might be saying, well, I've actually been working here for 20 years because I like it, but this is something that I've seen need to change or that I would like to suggest to change. However, someone who has been working for the same corporation in the same position doing the same thing for 20 years with blind thinking would probably say something along the lines of, no, there ain't nothing to change. Now, obviously, it's nothing wrong with if you say that you're open-minded, but you didn't find anything to change. Yet again, not change for change's sake, but change because you have something to back it up with. Creative thinking, increasing performance, changing the way you work. But if you don't have it, it's not the biggest thing in the world. However, blind-minded people, or blind thinking, is people who might have seen something. They might have the insight, but they've actively taken distance from that insight because they just don't want to deal with it. Perhaps it is because they don't want to deal with it because they don't want to apply the resources and their mind and their space, or what should we say, their thinking time, however you want to say it, their free time in solving a problem. Maybe it is because they're quote-unquote too lazy to do it. Maybe it is because they're very afraid of change. It could be all of these things. But I would highly encourage you, in order to increase the performance that you have at work, is try to do something new. Try to implement a small little change in your execution of a task and see if it becomes better. Now, if it becomes worse, you just retract and go back to the old way. If it becomes better, then you have maybe revolutionized the entire way that you actually work with this task. You've introduced a new way of doing it, and then when you've seen that it works, you can, or rather you've done your own trial test, you can go to your superior or to your manager and be saying like, can we implement this change? You see, I've found this way of doing it and it's more effective. Simultaneously, as you're saving the company money because it's a more effective approach, you're also going to change the way that you execute this task a little bit, right? And that little change might be a renewal for you and for your coworkers, enough of a renewal to make it fun to work again. Wow, it sounds so depressing, but make it sort of this new experience, because when you've done something, no matter what it is, for X amount of years, it probably will become quite dull and sort of, as I said, on rails, and you want to sort of recapture this idea, well, now it's something new, now we're doing something new, we're iterating on it, we're improving on it, and that in a sort of make it funnier and make it better, and that will also lead to you being like, well, this is a bit more of a fun experience. That mentality can probably lead to a higher performance as well. But also, obviously, if you make a production more efficient, that will also lead to higher performance. Perhaps not necessarily in more things produced, but you can say, well, it costed us less material, so we can use that material in order to produce more. So if you save something, if you make something more efficient, if you find a better solution for something, you will increase performance in some form. And that is what I would like to encourage you all to do. Now, I'm just going to leave you with this as well. It might sound crazy to some of you, it might sound like I'm the messiah to some of you, right? But think positively when you're supposed to increase your own performance. I know. Some people, as I said, will think that that's ludicrous. Others will think that, wow, that's the smartest thing I've ever heard. Because if you go in with a positive mindset of, I'm going to make a change, I'm going to make the best that I can, I'm going to do the best I can, that will also increase your performance. If you go in and try to visualize change, let's just say that you're thinking in a very colorful perspective. I do that when I try to sort of trigger my own imagination and creativity. I imagine everything in different colors because I want to sort of categorize it in different ways that I don't necessarily see it in my everyday life. You can go in with that mindset, and that will sort of spark your creativity, spark your imagination, so that you can find these solutions that you didn't necessarily find over the last 10 years that you've worked there. And now you can try to apply your insight of having worked there for a long time with the spark of creativity that you've tried to trigger, and this positive mindset of that I'm actually going to make a change. Now you're making the production more effective, most likely, right? And you're increasing the performance of the entire company and of you as well, and you're looking good favor with the boss. Now, that's everything from me today, mates. Tomorrow we're probably probably going to look into free time and imagination, and that's also going to be tied to the workplace because you need to have a good free time if you're going to perform well. So have a nice one, mates. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.